Welcome to another episode of Waking Up to Life, 18 Minutes with Rabbi Josh. It's a podcast built around conversations with people in the community around the world who have found a bit of enlightenment in their lives. While these events may not seem life-changing to you, the conversation will reveal how the moments have shaped the world in which my guests live. It's an informal conversation, peppered with insights from Jewish tradition, and it may just change your life as well. And if not, well, it's 18 minutes with me. So, l'chaim, to life. On today's show, we are blessed to be able to welcome Dr. Tomer Malchi, who is the executive director of Cultivaid in Israel. He is a Ph.D. in soil and water sciences and has spent the bulk of his recent career working as an Israeli NGO, doing African work with the African subcontinent and changing the lives of people on the ground with agronomy and farming and soil and water. And it turns out that I'm lucky enough to be working with him as well as a part of a project supporting the emerging Jewish community of Ethiopia. So Tomer, thank you for being on the show.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you, Josh, for having me. I'm honored to be on this program.
So it's a conversation that we'll have, and whereas some people have joined the show and talked about a challenging moment in their life that they learned a lesson, for you, your moment of enlightenment came around something very simple, the power of water. So talk a little bit about that experience that you had.
So it came out of nowhere, I gotta say. I feel old just going back in time, but I was about 24, 25 years old. At the time, working at Starbucks. You have now a lot of news about the unionizing campaign. So I was back at the first round back almost 20 years ago, and that's what I was doing back then. And I don't know why. I don't know what caused it, but suddenly I had to read everything I could about international water politics. I grabbed book after book. I would seriously go on breaks, sit at Barnes and Nobles, and just kind of read every book I could find about water, whether it's about what was happening in Bolivia with people suddenly being charged for water, looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and where water comes in, looking at water problems in the United States. Everything I could find, I had to read, and this is before smartphones. This is before it was really, I just read, I had to go to a library and read books. I don't know why, but I couldn't stop reading about water. And I decided that I need to take another step into that world, going into the sciences of it, to understand, have a really deep understanding of what this means. At the time, I recently met my girlfriend back then, who was an Israeli. She wanted to go back to Israel. And we decided to go back together after stopping for a few months in San Francisco. We moved back to Israel, not my wife. So it was a good decision. And I ended up looking at all of the, Israel, of course, is powerhouse of water technology. So I started looking at, okay, where am I going to restudy, do another bachelor's, maybe do a master's. I ended up going to doing another bachelor's degree. So I had a bachelor's from Cornell University in industrial labor relations, and I really said, okay, I'm doing something really different. Did another bachelor's degree in soil and water sciences at the Faculty of Agriculture of Hebrew University. And it's amazing. I went to study soil and water sciences, and then what happened was I fell in love with soil. Something I didn't expect, but anyone who ever looks at what soil is made up of, it is a fascinating world of electrical charges and ions, and all of the basis of agriculture really depends on a good, healthy soil, and understanding what that means in terms of microbiology and physics and chemistry is it's an amazing, fascinating world. So that's, and then as you said, I ended up doing a master's, a PhD, and while that was happening, I founded chapters of Engineers Without Borders that ended up developing to Cultivaid, which today I run. I found that with two partners, Ben Cohen and Yair Kenan, and we started an organization that really started, $25,000 to establish a small demonstration site. And today we are working in 3 different countries, soon to be 4, with agricultural programs that are supporting governments, businesses, farmers, and having an immense impact wherever we are. And it's all because of just some kind of intuition that I need to start reading about water. So
it's amazing to hear you talk in those terms. I can't help but, as the rabbi in the conversation, link this to the elemental moment in our people's history when we left Egyptian slavery, and it was that moment at the water, the parting of the Red Seas, that sort of birthed the search for land. And that's really what you're talking about. A water moment led you to this search for soil and an understanding. But it's interesting to hear you talk about water in those terms. What is it about water that is so elemental, right? Our bodies are comprised mainly of water. What is it for you about the water itself that has sort of enlightened you to what matters in the world?
So before I answer, I'll actually give a little bit of I'll put in my own Jewish thoughts into here, although it's not my world. Abraham, when you read, in the Torah, you see that he's constantly finding water, digging wells. Like, it's a big part of his story as well. And I think a lot of it is really, what does that mean? What is it about in the Torah? What does it mean that he's finding wells, that he's digging, that there's water? And I think with water, first of all, there's prosperity, right? The wealth that we build comes from the fact of having water for agricultural production, basis of economic development. We can't drink without water. Water is the basis of life in many ways, both on a physical level, but also on a spiritual and mental level. I don't know how to explain it. I think that there's just a lot of connections. The physical properties of water are extremely different from everything else on this planet. It's hard to explain, but there's something in water that when you dive into it, sit in the ocean for a bit, you understand that everything is different. Everything suddenly stops. Everything calms down. Sitting in a pool of water, you get to understand something else about life. So I don't know. I'm not sure I answered your question.
You did a nice job of answering. It is elemental. There is something at a core level that connects us human beings to water. I'm wondering, though, as you've started to do this work in Africa, trying to help people access fresh water, drinkable water, and how to use that water to sustain themselves. What is a lesson that you have learned about those interactions with people as a result of your connection to water and soil?
I think one of the most important things that comes out in my mind is really the idea of responsibility. I think oftentimes we fail to understand what it means to take responsibility. I think in our world today, not enough people take responsibility. We're very quick to blame everyone else for our problems. If you look at in the United States, problems of obesity, it's never the person who's obese. It's not his fault. It's the fast food. But where's that personal responsibility? How come we don't take? We always look for the government is to blame. there's not enough personal responsibility at the end of the day. And I think from my interactions, one of the most inspiring moments I had was really sitting with our program manager in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, Hagos. And he was recently appointed. He's been in there for half a year at this time. And I sit down with him to see how he's doing, what he thinks of his position as being a coordinator. And he says, it's the first time anyone has ever given me any responsibility. I had no idea what responsibility was. I go to sleep thinking about work. I get up thinking about work. I love it. I'm responsible for something. Someone trusts me to do something. And I think, this is something that I'm not sure we all understand how important it is to be responsible beyond just, just yourself, being responsible for the world itself. Whether you look at my actions individually and my actions as a community, how they affect everyone around me, how they affect me, how they affect people I've never met before on the other side of the world. There's a lot to talk about when we talk about what is our responsibility to this world, to this planet, to future generations. And I think this is something that really comes about. And I think one of those really, I'm going to relate back to water, is, when you look at polluted lakes, at polluted ecosystems, what the failure of responsibility of past generations to look at what will happen in the future is something that we're trying to deal with now and struggling to do so. But I think it's possible. I'll also say this, and maybe this is something that's always interesting to talk about, is I'm very optimistic about the future. I think we're fed a lot of fear, but I think the future is very bright, and that we're in an amazing position in world history, and amazing things are about to come up in front of us.
So it's amazing to hear you talk in those terms. You talked about personal responsibility. What you didn't talk about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is the other side of that equation, accountability. How do we hold others accountable for even the small actions that are necessary to do that? You talked about the optimistic future. It does demand that we are held accountable to do our part, whether it's the simple act of not throwing your straw on the ground so that it goes into a water source and ultimately gets to the ocean, or a more global accountability, which is asking governments and agencies to behave differently. So how do you deal with the accountability side of that responsibility question?
It's interesting. I really am not sure. I think anyone who's responsible, truly responsible, doesn't need to worry about accountability because they will do what they're responsible to do. The accountability aspect is for people who do things without being responsible, where someone is responsible for cleaning up a lake and they didn't do it. They were never really responsible, so of course they're not accountable. So if we have true responsibility for others, accountability should be something that we just check off very easily on the list. And the problem is that people just aren't. It goes back to the problem that people just aren't responsible for what they're supposed to be responsible for.
Okay, so I have to ask you this, and you may not be able to answer. I have some inside information, and because we're friends as well, that you're a new father. And obviously you must be thinking about, how do I teach my new child this sense of responsibility in the world? Have you given any thought to what it will take to allow him to become a responsible member of the community?
I have a lot of thoughts about raising children, because when you do it, you start thinking about every action you do. And I think the first and most important thing is to be a role model. They learn by what they see. So the fact that they see even the little things, on how we treat our partners, the responsibility that we take with each other, that, if someone needs help on a very small local level, if someone needs help picking something up from the ground, or picking something up, raising something, taking something outside, and that's where it starts. I think it starts with some basics idea of, you see an old person that requires a helping hand, that's where it starts. Those are the first moments that you teach a child to act with responsibility towards others. So I think the bigger issues that I deal with, if that's something that he decides to deal with, good for him. But I think more it's starting with by just being a good person and having responsibility for the people around you.
Goes back to the very core essence of Judaism, right? You look at the commandments of the Torah, and that is exactly what's being created, is a society where people do the right thing because it's the right thing, not because there's a reward or punishment. That's very esoterical, right? We can talk philosophy, we can talk religion. I'm wondering if, as a scientist today, with a new PhD in hand, can you identify 2 or 3 actionable items where people who are listening to this podcast can do the right thing with regard to water, soil, universe? And it can be as simple as just, okay, really follow through on your responsible recycling? Or is there something, are there things that you can just tell us to do today that will help us take responsibility for the planet?
So I have a very, very strong recommendation. If there's young people here listening, become engineers, become experts in what you're in the science of it. There's too much of emphasis that solutions will be brought up and put to work on a legal. You need to be a politician. You don't need solutions to come from politicians. They need to come from experts. I think that people who are listening and want to say, how do we change the world? The best thing is to get people who have a good heart to become scientists, to become engineers, and to learn these fields of study to be able to afterwards also change. And I'll make a little plug because I'm here.
I was actually going to ask you to do this. I was going to tell you if there's a 20-some-year-old here looking for an opportunity, what can they do today?
So at the Faculty of Agriculture today in Israel, there's a new or an updated international, there's an international school, and there's an environmental studies program. It's a master's degree for anyone who is looking to really understand these issues. Israel is a great place to get an understanding of them. It's a first step also to anyone who's interested in doing research in Israel, or even to look at coming to work at Cultivaid. We have a strong internship program where we put young agronomists in the field in the countries we work in, mostly in Africa, to do good work, to also learn agriculture on a very deep level, to also understand how to work in an international context. If there are young people who are listening, we are glad to check our website out. Come approach us. We are more than happy to also just even give advice on how to get into this world. And I do recommend looking at the Faculty of Agriculture, Hebrew University's international program. The program for environmental studies is now open. There's an open day actually coming up, I think next week. And if there are people who are interested, they should look it up. So these are 2 organizations that are definitely a good start for anyone who's interested. I would also say, if anyone really has questions on how to get into this world of agricultural development, looking at how to make this world a better place from a scientific point of view, as scientists, as experts, as engineers, as agronomists, feel free to contact me. I'm very open to guiding people on how to get into this world. There are many opportunities and good salaries. So it's something that should be considered. If you're going to do good in the world, you can also earn a good salary doing it, and you don't have to give up on a certain lifestyle if to do good in the world.
So I think what you're saying is, if you want to be a responsible citizen of the world, you have to become a professional responsible citizen of the world. In whatever area you want to take responsibility, take that seriously and use the power of education, the power of systems to become a professional in the area of responsibility, whatever area that is. In this case, we're talking about science, but it really, I think, applies to anything. If you want to do something well, you have to simply do it well. But you don't need experience, right? For somebody to come work with Cultivaid or somebody to get their hands dirty, they don't need to be already an agronomist, right? An agronomist is anybody willing to put their fingers in the earth, correct?
You need to have some kind of a background that is useful, meaning that if you have a degree in philosophy and you've never planted a vegetable, I don't have much use for you, to be honest. But if you have experience in agriculture or a degree, and you have basics that we can work with, then yeah, because part of it is to take knowledge that exists and train others. There are different programs also in Israel that can help train someone who's interested in coming into this world. And also in the United States, you have lots of agricultural training programs. But I think it's important to follow your passion. First of all, if there's something out there that you find, I'm so interested in this, go for it. No, don't listen to anything anyone tells you. If you have a passion, find a way to make a living from that passion, because it's there. There's a reason that, Borei Olam gave you this passion. Like, it's there for a reason. Work with it. So I think for me, it's water science, agriculture, and people who want to, if people have passions for making this world a better place, I recommend looking at what science really drives you, which one finds this interest in you, because that's how you really can change something. It's really by finding solutions that are practical, scientific, and they're out there. There are amazing companies, startups that are now working at the environmental level, at the agricultural level, that connect high tech with agriculture, with the environmental sciences. There's you think about the smartphone. It's been around for less than 10 years and on a popular level. We're just getting started with the digital revolution. Like, it's a brand new world, it really is.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And who would have thought that a young man working at a Starbucks would end up creating his own NGO with partners and literally every single day changing the world. I have eyes on that firsthand. And by the way, if anybody wants that philosophy degree and wants to use that somehow, you can come to me. That's sort of my business. So the scientists can go to you, Tomer. The philosophers can come on my side of the conversation, and we can work together side by side. It's such
I'd say that I totally agree. I think there's lots of room for philosophy. I don't say that anything is against it. Also, my wife is a dancer. She does art. And I think that part of my inspiration, part of my motivation is built from seeing art and being part of a different world and allowing that to infiltrate into my thinking. Like, these two all come together hand in hand. They all work together. So definitely.
Look, let's talk a quick shameless plug about the work we're doing together. The American Friends of Beta Israel of North Shoah. This is the religious side and the philosophical side and the scientific side sort of coming together. And our partnership is helping people be self-sustainable, both from the standpoint of agriculture and food and their own personal sustainability, but also self-determination as Jews. And I think that we have to work together. We have to be multidisciplinary and bring people together. And the work that we can do is monumental. So it's just a joy. It's a joy to have you, a pleasure to talk to you, to listen to something outside of what we're usually talking about, which is fundraising for these projects that we're doing. But it's really a pleasure to have you on the show. As we're coming towards the end, I just want to ask you a quick question that I have asked every one of my guests. I'm springing this on you at the end without preparation, but is there right now a book that you are reading, a television show that you're watching, a podcast that you're listening to that has really sort of reshaped the way you're thinking about the world? Anything you could recommend to the listeners?
Definitely. I recently read Factfulness, and it is a book that is amazing. I'll just quickly say that the book in it talks a lot about how we need to update our understanding of the world. When you think about Africa, what comes to mind? You think of poor children in a rural community, but that's not Africa. Like, when you look at what's happened in the last 10, 20 years, economic growth of 5 to 10% in many African countries, along with investments coming in. You see large farms establishing, you see industry popping up, you see cities today that are very modern. The image of what we see of Africa needs to be updated in everyone's mind. Africa is not what it was when I was in high school. And most of the people who are now teaching about Africa probably were never there and don't understand the changes that it's gone through. In the 10 years that I've been coming to Ethiopia, it's a whole different place. Addis Ababa is an incredible city with huge buildings. It's not what you expect. The book Factfulness talks about how most world leaders, most decision makers have an outdated thinking. Like when he really talks about asking these questions, and that most of the times, like if I say, what is the amount of people without clean water in the world? If it was 30-something% 30 years ago, how is it today? Most people, less than, he uses this analogy. He says that he asked the group and he asked a bunch of monkeys. The monkeys statistically answered 1/3 to A, B, or C, and the group of people also would answer according to what they thought, A, B, or C.
Wow.
The monkeys always score better than the people, because people have an outdated sense of what's really happening. You know, today, less than 10% of the world does not have access to water. You know, less than 10% of the world is making below what's determined poverty wages. Like, it's amazing. The world is a much better place than it was 10 years ago. And we somehow have failed to understand this. But yeah, so this book is what I recommend, because it really updates our program.
And the title is, again?
Factfulness.
Factfulness. Do you know the author's name?
I have to look it up. I don't remember it offhand, but as we speak, I will. Factfulness. It's Anna Rosling Ronoland and Ola Rosling.
Perfect. Factfulness. We'll put it when we post the podcast. I'll make sure to link to
it. Hans Roland. I'm sorry, Hans Rosling.
Amazing. I'm ready to buy the book today. At what I think you mentioned something that was called a bookstore. I've not heard of that before, so maybe I'll have to go to a bookstore. A bookstore or a library, something like that.
I'll be honest. I actually listen to the books on Audible, to be honest.
Most of what I do is that way as well. And hopefully people are watching and listening to this podcast on Audible or the Apple Podcast Store. Anyway, Dr. Tomer Malchi from Cultivaid. So good to work with you every single day that we do our project together. So good to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
So to everybody who's listened today, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this newest episode of Waking Up to Life with Rabbi Josh. Continue to do good work in the world, continue to take responsibility, and every day, wake up to life. We'll see you next time. L'chaim.